Oh, hey guys, thanks for tuning in to another episode of Nev's Garage. Now, if this is your first time joining us, please hit that subscribe button and toggle on that little bell. That way you'll be notified when our next video drops. Don't get too concerned with what's going to happen in the future now though, because today we've got a great video featuring this MY99 WRX. What we're going to be doing is we're going to be rebuilding the alternator, right? We're going to rip it apart, we're going to put new bearings in it, I'm going to check out the brushes and everything as well. It's super easy, I'm going to walk you through it. Let's get into it. Alright guys, so first of all, let's take the battery terminal off, the negative. Okay, cool. Alright, so now next we're going to take the belt covers off the front here. Okay, like that. Next we're just going to drop the belts off. So first we just loosen the alternator, so undo the pinch bolt. We've already undone the pivot bolt here because this mount is clamped underneath it. So this one here now. Undo him loose enough to get the belt off. Boom. Now we can undo the wiring on the alternator. Alright. So number 10 on top there. We're gonna do it just by hand. Now hold the terminal as we undo it because we don't want it to twist inside the alternator. That's that one. And now the connector on the back of the alternator here. I'm just going to take this pinch bolt all the way out now. And I'll let that alternator come up quite a bit to get this connector out. Okay, that's the wiring for the alternator removed. Alright. Now we'll just take the pivot bolt right out. Make sure you grab the bracket at the back so you don't lose it down on the engine block. And that's the pivot bolt. And out she comes. There's the alternator out. Alrighty, cool. Alright guys, so we've got our alternator off. Now let's pull it down. So first of all we're going to turn it to the bottom. And we're going to just put a mark across the bottom here so we know how it goes back together. So we get the orientation right. Alright, so we're just going to use a center punch. And we're just going to put a dot here. And a dot here. And we're going to put a scratch across the coil. Like that. Okay, see that? That'll help us put it back together in the right spot. Alright, first of all, big nut off the front. So 24mm. Off it comes. Pulley comes off. Okay. Now we undo the back nuts on the case. And now the bolts that go through the case that join the two pieces together. Now we should be able to bump the front case off. Probably just pull it off like that. There we go, there's the front case and our front bearing. Now we want to get the back case off as well. I'm just going to give it a bump. And there it is. there's our rear bearing. Alright, so let's just whip the armature out and have a look at the condition of the brushes and everything while we've got the unit apart. So there's our brushes in the back, okay. Now you can see there that one is nice and healthy, got a lot of meat on it, and the one at the back here though is well worn, like that would have been barely working. And you can tell by the burr on this trailing edge how it's all cocked sideways, so the brush is actually that short, it's moving in the holder. So let's just see if there's something we can do about that. So let's whip our soldering iron out. The good part about it is this outside or top brush is the one we can get to without pulling the regulator apart. Alright guys, so before we do any work on these brushes, let's just clean the housing out there. There's a fair bit of old powder and stuff in there. Let's get rid of that. Okay, so now we've got it clean. Now here's the solder spot for that top brush, right? That's where the wire or the tail gets soldered into the reg. So what we're going to do now is just desolder that. So let's fire up the old soldering iron. What I'm going to do, I'm actually going to compress this while we desolder it. And get my solder sucker ready. So let's go. Alright, so that's got it desoldered. Now I was hoping to have a bit of extra tail there that we could just release and make the brush longer, but we don't. So we're going to have to replace that brush. So if we pull this socket out now, in theory, it pretty much should pop out. Right, so there's the brush. There's its spring, we want to keep that. So now we just got to give this bad boy a measure and get a replacement brush to put in there. Pretty simple. Alright, so she's 7.86 by 4.88. And she's worn down to 12 mil. Alright, let's get a new brush. Alright guys, well I got the stator coil and rear assembly all cleaned up. I give the metal ring a bit of a paint with some satin black, so it looks sweet as. Now let's get to work replacing this brush. So these are the brushes that I've got. Now these are to suit a Bosch unit because they're more available than the Hitachi brushes. They come as a pair, they're really cheap. So you can see there that it's a lot longer than what was in it. So it's going to make our alternator last a lot longer. Now, first of all, let's just check it for size. It's pretty close. This is a 5x8. Let's just see if it goes in the housing. Yeah, she's a little tight. So what we're going to do is we're just going to resize this so that it fits in the hole, which is real easy. Just a bit of a rub with some sandpaper, and Bob will be our uncle. Alright, so we're just going to give it a dry rub with some 1200 wet and dry, and basically we're just going to give it a polish. So hold it flat against the flat face, rub on that side, right, so let's give it a tickle on the wide flat side as well. Okay, just going to, just give it a polish. Let's measure him now. .84. Okay, let's try it in the brush holder now and see how it looks. I reckon that's good. It's got a little bit of free play. Can still push in and out freely. When it expands a little in the heat, it's still going to work. Compare it to the other one. Yep, I reckon we're good. So that's that part of the modification finished. Now you'll notice that it's a little bit different shape on the end to the old one. Okay, you can see it there because our Hitachi brushes are obviously offset to center a little more than the Bosch brushes. That's okay though. We're just going to reshape the end of this Bosch brush so it's the same as our Hitachi brush, so our alternator works straight away. Okay, so to do that I've got a bit of 220 wet and dry, and basically I'm just going to find something with a curve like this socket, wrap the paper around it, and just rub the edge of the brush, the front of the brush, along the socket. Until we get that shape. Getting there. Okay, there we go. Alright, so there we go. There's our new one against our old one. Shape's roughly the same. Now there's just one thing I want to do now is just put a chamfer on the long edges so that it fits our old brass ring. So just like this. Like that. Okay, cool. Then our brush won't have to wear in, it'll work straight away. Alright, so let's put this brush in. Alright, now so we've got our new brush with this little tail already on it. Now don't forget the spring, of course. Now we're going to reuse the original spring. Make sure there's no loose sprags on the little cord. Spring goes down here like that. Okay, now how are we going to put this all the way into there and out that little hole? Going to be difficult. I'm going to show you a trick. So I've got this bit of old wire. I've stripped about 4 inches off the end of it. We're going to pull it through with that. So in through the bum, up like this, and we're just going to put a little spot of solder on there. And that's how we're going to pull our brush through. And get our 2 parts ready, and alright, so unfortunately I mustn't have pressed record in the last section. So what we did was we soldered the end of the brush lead onto this pull wire, okay, and we pulled our brush through, which worked a treat. Now you can see it in there. Now I've set the depth of it with this socket, okay. You can see the protrusion is a little more than the old brush, and we've done that because our outer brush obviously wears more than our inner brush, probably because of the direction of current. So that should give it a head start. So we have got the brush in there. I've just given a bit of a spot solder on the end there, cut the lead, bent the lead over, and now we're just going to finish soldering it in. Obviously don't want to get our regulator too hot. Beautiful. Just going to chill that with our little soldering iron cleaning pad. Okay, cool. She's all done. Okay, am I recording this time? Yep. Sorry about that, guys. Lucky Paris Hilton didn't forget to press record because she would never have become famous. Anyway, thankfully, we're just talking about alternator brushes, so you get the idea anyway. The brush is in there, okay, and we can just, check it works, which it does. Beautiful. Compresses all the way in, flies out with tension, okay, looking good, nice. All right, so basically the back of our unit can go on now. So let's feed our armature up through our stator and we can start assembling the unit. Alright guys, so let's pull the old rear bearing off the main shaft now. So for that we need our little alternator bearing puller. Alright, once we got them clamped up, and should be able to just wind this bearing off. Grease on all the threads, of course, on our puller. Don't want anything binding. There it is. She's off. Easy peasy. So now what we're going to do is we're just going to clean up the copper rings where the brushes go and press our new bearing on. So very gently with a brass wire brush, we're just going to give these a bit of a clean. So that's pretty clean. Going to give it a quick charge with compressed air. Alright, cool. So we're ready for our little bearing now to press him on. So here it is here. Nice quality Japanese bearing. Now it has this tension ring on it. Okay. That goes towards the back of the unit and just helps hold it in the housing. So the bearing goes on this way. Now I'm just going to clean that shaft, put a teeny tiny bit of Lennox on it, because there's always time for lube. And then just start our bearing on there like that, and then we're going to head over to our press. Alright, so we've got a nice soft block of pine here to put the front of the shaft against so we don't damage it. A appropriate size socket so that we just push on the center of the bearing. Let's pump it. Just carefully. Carefully. Slow and steady. Okay, got quite a bit of pressure on it there now, so I'm just going to see it might be level with the shaft now. Let's have a look. Yep. We're just going to change the socket now to a 9mm. And it's got a chamfer in it. So we can just push it on a teeny tiny little bit more. There we go. Lovely. Cool. You can see by the old tide mark in there that that's where the old bearing was. Excellent. Alright, so let's knock the old bearing out of the front casing. So we just undo these 3 screws. Like that. That exposes our bearing. Okay, now let's just take him over to the press and bump him out. Now, alright, so it's out. So I'm just going to go and clean that housing and we'll press our new bearing in. Alright guys, so I got the housing all cleaned up. Got our new bearing. Okay, nice good quality Japanese bearing. Now, she's been in the freezer for about an hour, which will make it shrink just a teeny tiny little bit. We're going to add a bit of heat to the housing. And just make things a lot easier to assemble. So there's our bearing. Plonk him on top of the housing like that. Put our press tool on top. And pumpy. He's in there. Lovely. And now we just screw our retaining plate back on now. Okay, so we've got our bearing in our front plate. So now let's just put our retaining ring on there. Alright, she's in there. Oh, so sweet. Okay, cool. So that's both our bearings pressed in now, ready to assemble. Alright, so now we can assemble our stator and brush and regulator assembly into our rear case. Alright, so we're going to put it in the rear case. We're going to reassemble it a little different to how we disassembled it. We're going to put the shaft in last. So first of all, we just pop our gasket back on. Okay, like that. Now our back case just slides on. So on she goes like that. And don't push on the windings, push on the actual steel rings if it needs a bit of gentle persuasion. Like that, okay. Now we can put our back nuts on. Now it doesn't hurt to spray a bit of dielectric grease under these nuts. That way we know that they're going to get a good earth to the casing. Okay, so we're just going to tighten them up by hand because they don't need to be torqued up really tight, they just need to be firm. Okay, that's perfect. Now our power output stud goes in. Make sure you give it a real good clean first. Okay, nice and shiny. A bit of dielectric grease on him, won't go astray either. Just tighten it up firm, like that. Back cover snaps in, boom. That one can just stay loose for now. Alright, so that's our back cover on our assembly. Now what we need to do is just pop the brushes in and put a grenade pin in. So we're going to be using this grenade pin. This is an old one off a timing tensioner. Straight down the hole in the back here. Right, so what we're going to do here is I'm going to use one finger in the grenade pin hole like this to hold pressure against the pin, and then I just pop the brushes in one at a time and pop the pin past the front of it like that. Okay, and you can see now that those brushes are held in their housing by the pin. See in there, right. So now we can put our shaft in, our armature. What I'm going to do is I'm going to stand our shaft up on there like that, pop our main casing over it. That's it, guys, she's in there. Alright, so now we can let our grenade pin go. Boom. And put the front of our unit together. So, real simple. Spacer. Front casing. Now remember, we marked the casing. So there's our dot. And there's our dot. Like that. And with a bit of luck we should be able to squeeze it together. Yep. Boom. Okay, now our bolts go through. Bit of Lanox on the thread of these to lube them. So they do go into aluminium. Okay, so same thing. Tighten them up, just firm. Make sure you do them up even as well. Cool. Now the front pulley. $24mm, and just hold the pulley and rattle him up. And that's it, she's together. Oh, spins beautifully. Lovely. So smooth and quiet. And it looks nice and tidy too. So there's our alternator all together. Now we can refit it. Alright, so here's our alternator. Going back in now. It just goes down here. Like this. Bracket on the back with the captive nut. And the pivot bolt. Okay. And just run him up a bit. Oh, still loose, okay, so it can pivot. Now our pinch bolt and tensioner assembly. Okay. So grease the thread of this bad boy, okay, because you don't want this seizing up. Down through here. And then our pinch bolt. Got some EDCs on it because it screws into the alternator casting. And we don't want to strip or snap it. Okay, and leave it so it can slide. Like that, lovely, lovely. Alright, so now our belts can go on. So obviously our aircon belt goes on first. Okay, that'll do for now till we get the alternator belt on. So it goes on now. It's a lot easier. Around the power steering, around the alternator, and then onto the crank. Okay. Also check it's seated. Yep, looks good. Yep, looks good. So we can start running the tensioner up on the alternator. Now this tension does change a bit when you lock the pivot bolt up, so we're going to tighten it up a little more now. So just tighten it up and then back it off a smidge, like that. Better chance of getting our tension right. Alright, now we tighten up all our pivots and pinch bolts. Okay, nice. So now our wiring loom. So here we go. Plug our aircon clutch plug back in. Click. And then our regulator plug goes around the side here. Boom, like that. And then our 12 volt feed. Alright, so you're going to want to make sure that this one's nice and clean. So we're going to give it a really good wire brush. It is tinned copper, so it shouldn't rust, but you know, they do get dirty. Cool. A bit of dielectric grease doesn't go astray either. Okay, spray it on there. And then we're ready to put it on the output stud. So he goes down like that. Get our spring washer and our nut. Okay, and I'm just going to do this very gently because we don't want to snap off what's inside of the alternator. So make sure you hold the terminal so it doesn't twist. Tighten it up and put our insulator back on. Alright, so now let's reconnect the battery. Lovely. Alright, so now we've got it all back together. We want to just check the charge rate. So what we do is we start the car up and test how it's charging to the battery in volts. So let's give it a whirl. Sounds really good. So we'll put our multimeter on 20 volts. And check our battery voltage. So we should see about 14.4 or 5 hopefully. 14.8. Beautiful. Very good. Okay, cool. So we're charging beautifully. Alright, so now we've had it running, check the charge rate, we can check all the belt tensions now, finally. Yeah, they seem to be fine, they've settled in, no problem at all. So let's put our belt covers on and we're done. So remember our alternator and power steering cover actually goes under the alternator pivot bolt, so we need to undo it again. Just enough to slide this under, like that. Now our plastic cover just slips over top like this. Cool, job done guys. Okay guys, so it's pretty easy to remove and repair a Subaru alternator, huh? It's going to be running nice and quiet now, and it's going to be charging for a long time into the future. So that's a job well done. Thanks for staying to the end and watching us here. Also, thanks for liking, sharing and subscribing. Make sure you email the video link to a friend so they can watch it too. But until next time, I'm Nev, this is my garage, and I'll catch you around.